The study of Sanskrit is an extremely vast field that encompasses numerous theories. Some of them have disappeared over time, while others have been reinforced by new ideas that emerged to fill the gaps throughout the 19th century up to the present day. Despite thorough research on YouTube, it is difficult to find videos that critically expose the inconsistencies surrounding Sanskrit and the Aryans, better known today as Indo-Europeans. Most of the available videos on the subject seem to embrace these ideas without questioning their accuracy, preferring to focus on scientific explanations that sometimes lack rigor. However, one notable exception is the Swiss French-speaking channel C'est Pas Sorcier, where the creators academically and thoroughly explore ideas and theories related to Sanskrit, from its origins to the present day. Their videos from the series The Indo-European Myth raise many questions and challenge established notions. Furthermore, there are 3 video conferences that challenge the foundations and authenticity of Indology, Indologists, Aryans, Sanskrit, Hinduism, and the connections of the Indo-European language with other ethnic groups. The first one is the conference by the French philosopher André Koolberg, titled The Aryan Myth, which presents these ideas as racist, contributing to the rise of Nazism. And it is he who will introduce us to the second conference, But Where Have the Indo-Europeans Gone?, by the French archaeologist and prehistorian Jean-Paul Demoule, author of several works, notably on the Indo-European problem. And the third is the conference by the Indian philosopher Aich Pradosh, known for his publication in the German language Lies with Long Legs, which we discovered through a video by a Russian YouTuber summarizing the overall topic of Sanskrit in a short period. The video from the Russian channel Historia P provides an interesting perspective, taking into account ideas widespread within the international community. We chose to translate it for this first part as it sets an appropriate background, particularly for beginners. In part 2, we will examine these theories in more detail. To make the presentation more dynamic, we have also added a brief animation to accompany the narration. So, get comfortable and let's embark on a journey through these theories, where beliefs and illusions form magical symphonies.
Hello, everybody. The video about the artificial languages of Europe aroused great interest in you. I liked your comments, sometimes contradictory comments. At the beginning, I had planned to publish 2 other videos on this subject, Latin language and Russian. But from the comments, I realized that the topic of Sanskrit was not disclosed, and this is a very important brick of world history. After all, Sanskrit is not just one of the languages of ancient India. Sanskrit has a great sacred significance in world history, especially since Sanskrit in Russia is considered the language of slaves Aryans' ancestors. Many scientists attribute Sanskrit to the Indo-European language group, which includes European languages as well as the Russian language, especially since scientists believe that Sanskrit is the closest to the universal language. It is believed that Sanskrit came to India from the north, probably Russian territories with native Aryan speakers. Quite simply, scientists believe there was once a single proto-civilization inhabited by superhuman Aryans. These Aryans spoke a common proto-language, and this language is most similar to Sanskrit. The Aryans lived a territory in the north, and not necessarily in the territories of Russia. Then, for some reason, the Aryans left the northern territories and moved to the territory of India. Then the Aryans scattered all over the world and other languages appeared. There are opinions that most European languages are related to Sanskrit, which is closest to the proto-language of the ancient Aryans. I myself have nothing against the Slavs, Bulgarians, Aryans, Lithuanians, and other nationalities. I will just give you some very interesting facts, and you will decide for yourself what Sanskrit is. And maybe that will make you think about all this interesting history with the Indo-European languages and the Aryans. And maybe you'll see when it was invented. So, let's start. The first European who learned about Sanskrit and began to study it was the Jesuit Heinrich Roth. The Jesuits settled in Goa in 1652. In Goa, Heinrich Roth learned languages such as Persian, Urdu, Kannada. Subsequently, Heinrich Roth moved from Goa to Agra. It was the capital of the empire of the great Mughals. He took the high office of director of the Jesuit College. In Agra, he studied Sanskrit for 6 years. He considered it necessary for the fulfillment of his missionary duty. So he composes a Sanskrit grammar with Latin comments. To this day, Indologists claim that Heinrich Roth's grammar is the best of all. Certainly, historians do not know how and from whom Heinrich Roth took lessons in Sanskrit, but you have to give him credit. He did the best Sanskrit grammar ever. We could have called him the main discoverer of Sanskrit, but there is a but. It was not until 1988 that the world became aware of Heinrich Roth's writings when his manuscript was published. So let's go back and look for another principal discoverer of Sanskrit who was known to scientists in the 19th century. It is about Sir William Jones. This man in his 40s was a British judge in Calcutta. He came to Calcutta in 1783 and a few months later founded an Oriental society. Only British colonists of aristocratic origin had the right to be a member of society. Asians could not access it. The official name of the scientific society is the Asian Society of Bengal. Everything was fine with this scientific society, except for one thing: not a single scientist was a member of it. This is why Sir William drew Charles Wilkins into this society and declared him the greatest of Sanskrit scholars. Except that Charles Wilkins has never studied Sanskrit, he only recently mastered Bengali letters. Sir William and Charles Wilkins launched their first joint project, translation of Bhagavad Gita in English. To translate the Bhagavad Gita, they did not need knowledge of Sanskrit, because translations of this work existed in Persian and Arabic. Then Sir William asked Charles Wilkins to create a Sanskrit dictionary with the help of Pandits. Pandits are Brahmins who served the British government for money. But Wilkins could not use the help of the Indian Brahmins to write a Sanskrit dictionary. Because due to an illness in 1786, he sailed to England. There, he lives a long time, but without the Pandits, he finds himself without help. Thus, he was never able to write a Sanskrit dictionary. Instead, he compiled a collection of reading texts. It was a copy of the tales which had already been translated before him from Persian into English and French under the name of the Tales of Pelaya. And in 1795, Sir William Jones publishes some extracts from Mahabharata. But in truth, we do not know on which language he based himself to translate the Mahabharata. Is it from Persian, Arabic, or Sanskrit? Then in 1808 he published a Sanskrit grammar, but no one knows where he studied Sanskrit. Then new Sanskrit specialists appear, but for some reason they do not come from India, the motherland of the language, but from Europe. One of them, Friedrich von Schlegel. In 1808 he published a book titled On the Language and Wisdom of the Hindus. It was the first German edition of a literature of this kind. And here's the interesting thing. We are in 1803. Dorothea and Friedrich Schlegel live in Paris. Friedrich has just turned 31, and he decides to study Oriental languages. He decided to do it by himself without a mentor, according to a very simple scheme. He takes the original and translates it into different languages: Persian, Arabic, and Sanskrit. And by comparing the translations, he will be able to learn the grammar of different languages. On January 15th, Schlegel wrote to his brother, "I already have an Indian language
Textbook. But to study Sanskrit, I will only start in early spring, especially if there are libraries."
It is not known what type of textbook he was looking for in the libraries. Already on May 15th of the same year, he informed his brother of his brilliant achievements.
As everything fits together perfectly, I have already learned so much. Not only am I making progress in Persian, but I also finally achieved my big goal, becoming fluent in Sanskrit. I think that in 4 months, I will be able to read Shakuntala in its entirety.
In the letter of August 14th, he informs his brother that,
I have been working on Sanskrit study for a long time, and I already have extensive knowledge. I even had time to lend a hand in making a copy of a manuscript. As part of my activity, I also managed to make 2 dictionaries. I work 3 hours a day on Sanskrit, then 1 hour on Hamilton's heritage.
Friedrich Schlegel is not only an unlucky student, he today an internationally renowned German writer, poet, critic, and linguist. So this prosaic German genius studied Sanskrit from the works of Hamilton. Except that we do not know exactly where Alexander Hamilton studied Sanskrit. It is known that he arrived in Calcutta in 1784 and served as an officer. He soon retired and never met either Sir William or Charles Wilkins. He also had no dealings with the Brahmins Pandits, nor was he known to the circle of Sanskrit connoisseurs. This person has published several books on Sanskrit grammar. We don't really know where he learned it. Thus, Friedrich Schlegel studied Sanskrit from the works of Hamilton. If you want to know more about Europe's leading Sanskrit experts, follow the link below the video and read the full report by Doctor of Philosophy Aich Prodosh, and you will know much more about these so-called scholars of Sanskrit studies. Go further. Theoretically, it is of course possible to imagine such a situation. In India, thanks to the help of comparisons, English scientists were able to translate the Mahabharata written in Sanskrit. After all, there were already translations of Mahabharata into Persian and Arabic, and theoretically they could create a grammatical dictionary of Sanskrit. But with Sanskrit, everything is not so simple. Roughly speaking, Sanskrit itself, according to scientists, disappeared about 3,000 years ago. And for nearly 2,000 years, it was transmitted only by word of mouth to a very restricted circle of Brahmins. From childhood, Brahmins' children memorized dozens of volumes of text in Sanskrit and then transmitted them orally to other Brahmins for centuries. Even theoretically, I cannot imagine that with such oral transmission of information for 1,000 years, the phonetics of the language itself has not changed. And so, nothing can remain of the original sound, but Orientalists constantly talk about the uniqueness and expressiveness of Sanskrit. Let us now see which Mahabharata texts written in Sanskrit were translated, first by Arab and Persian scientists, and then by European scientists of the 19th century. I think there is none. Look at the oldest text written in Sanskrit. This is Bakhshali manuscript. An ancient mathematical text written on birch bark that was discovered in 1881. The manuscript was discovered by a peasant in a field. Just imagine India, very hot and humid, and that in these excellent preservation conditions, the text was preserved on the most durable material in the world, birch bark. The document is dated between 224 and 893 AD. This means that the birch bark has been in the field for over 1,000 years and nothing has happened to it. And it is the oldest document written in Sanskrit and already with the influence of local dialects. Maybe it needs a little thought. What have European scientists studied under the guise of Sanskrit? Even if the Brahmins were able to preserve Sanskrit orally for 2,000 years, so who put the oral traditions into written form, reinvented the grammar of Sanskrit, and wrote the Mahabharata? Well, let's say someone was able to do it. But how then to establish the true sound of the language? How to restore the length of the sound of vowels and other nuances of the language? But if historians are to be believed, European scientists managed to do this. The next interesting point is that almost all European scientists compared Sanskrit to ancient Greek. But with what ancient Greek, since it was lost and restored from documents written in Arabic in the 10th century? The result is that they have found the similarity of one non-existent language with another. They often compare Sanskrit to Lithuanian and find many similarities. However, I would like to know the adverb from which the dialect of the Lithuanian language is used, because before the reform of the Lithuanian language in the 19th century, two large groups of dialects were distinguished in it. Samogitian and Aukštaitian, adverbs divided into dialects, and these, in turn, into sayings. So, which exactly Lithuanian dialect does Sanskrit have so many similarities to? Now let's move on to the most interesting. As scientists say, Sanskrit is very similar to the Russian language. Svetlana Jarnikova will assist us in this process. In her video, link in the description, she talks about the greatness of Sanskrit, and moreover, she does not rely on her own work, but rather on the hard work of European scientists from the beginning of the 20th century. How did these scientists study Sanskrit? I told you about it at the very beginning of the video. Then in the second part, dear Svetlana Jarnikova tells the story of an incredible imagination. In the 60s of the 20th century, a famous Sanskritologist, Durga Prasad Shastri, arrived in Russia, visited a village and was amazed. My God, how Russian resembles Sanskrit! He understood it without an interpreter. Of course, it is better to watch this story yourself in the video of Svetlana Jarnikova. It's a very interesting story, of course, and it would certainly be true if it weren't for the development of technology. Now anyone can ask search engines. Sanskritologist Durga Prasad Shastri, and we get no result. The scientific world does not know this famous specialist. He simply does not exist. There is a Satyavrat Shastri, but there is no mention of his coming to Russia. There is also a Sanskritologist, Karaprasad Shastri, but he died in 1931. So, what famous Sanskritologist Svetlana Jarnikova was telling us about, and what influence Sanskrit could have on the languages of the world, draw your own conclusions about this.